There's nothing like somebody coming at you that's not going to stop, you know?
It was enemy attrition at the lowest possible cost, without regard to human life. The Kamikaze strategy is very demoralizing and very effective.
Well, I thought they were animals. Anybody could do that. That's not the way you're supposed to fight a war.
For 2 months in 1945, there was the most intense period of suicide bombing the world has ever seen. It was a strategy that ordered entire squadrons to fly to their deaths. How was a generation persuaded to sacrifice their lives? Were they brainwashed? Or true believers in their country's sacred history and samurai traditions? And what was the effect their attacks had on the enemy who faced them? This is the story of an entirely new kind of war. The spring of 1945. The Pacific War is drawing towards a momentous climax. Japan appears on the brink of defeat. Its cities are being leveled by American air raids. It's about to face the largest invasion fleet the world has ever seen. 1,300 Allied warships are gathering, ready to invade mainland Japan. For 2,000 years, no foreign army had occupied Japan's sacred land. But now, strangled by an economic blockade, the nation is on its knees. Superior American fighters are in control of the skies. And without air cover, Japan's first line of defense, her navy and merchant fleet, is decimated. Japan is wounded, but still dangerous.
We were in a truly pitiful situation. Eventually, Japan was going to be finished off.
Most of us were aware that we couldn't fight against America by ordinary means. I was one of them.
It would be difficult to win the war by just ordinary tactics, so the idea of suicide attack units emerged.
Japan's military leaders are locked in a bitter debate. With only air defenses left, some argue to continue conventional bombing attacks. But others demand a far more radical strategy: to use Japanese pilots as human bombs. They believe it's the only way to deliver maximum damage to the enemy. In February 1945, the man chosen to mastermind the new suicide squadrons is Vice Admiral Motomi Ugaki. The key to understanding the strategy of the Kamikaze is to understand him. A loner with a distinguished career in the Japanese Navy, he now shoulders the heavy responsibility for the fate of his nation. Time is short. 1,500 miles from Ugaki's base in southern Japan, part of the invasion fleet is gathering at the Pacific atoll of Ulithi. They believe they are safe out of range of the Japanese bombers. But Ugaki sees the situation differently. If his pilots sacrifice their lives flying a one-way mission, they could reach the Allied ships. Ugaki writes of his plans in a secret diary. It reveals a unique insight into the strategy of the Kamikaze and his own moral dilemma at what he's been ordered to do.
It is not because I'm unfeeling that I can send our young men to die.
広告の不沈はまさにこの時である。
Reconnaissance tells us there are 19 vessels at Ulithi, including many carriers.
Ugaki's plan entails a surprise long-range attack. The carriers are the key to the Allied offensive. They carry up to 100 planes each. If they can be destroyed, American air supremacy will be lost, and the Allied invasion plans in ruins.
成功は疑いない。総監は確信する。敵艦隊を撃沈せよ。はい。
On the evening of March 11th, the crew of the aircraft carrier USS Randolph are relaxing, watching a movie. 18-year-old Jim Vertolini is among them.
I was a radio operator, and I'd come off watch at 2000 hours, 8 o'clock. And I heard the song The Polonaise playing from the movie On the Hangar Deck, a song to remember. So I went down the ladder and sat at the back of the movie.
待ってください。また何か入ってきました。
The movie got over.
我敵空母に突入す。敵空母に突入す。
I turned around. All I saw was a big white flash. Guys laying all over the place, bleeding. The whole back end was on fire. Nobody knew what hit us. The smell, you can't imagine that smell of burned bodies.
26 U.S. crewmen are killed and another 105 injured. From now on, no Allied ship is safe. Commander Ugaki has fired a warning shot. The Japanese military is now fully committed to the strategy of the suicide attack. To succeed, it will require convincing hundreds, even thousands of young pilots to sacrifice their lives on one-way missions. At air bases across Japan, the call goes out.
今、広告は不沈の時を迎えている。よって一機当選の力を発揮する特攻作戦を採用し、その要員を募る。
In those days, except for only our eldest sons, young men were made to feel guilty if they did not volunteer. In our family, as well as Nobuaki, there were 3 boys. Naturally, my brother felt he should volunteer.
When pilots step up, they are given a stark choice. They can sign their name next to the words eager or very eager. For a generation of patriotic youths, peer pressure and deep-rooted traditions of honor, love of country, and family make the order impossible to resist.
Our commander gave a talk saying that Japan cannot survive with normal air combat tactics. Every plane must carry a bomb and explode over the enemy. This was the last resort. Everyone signed, eager or very eager. No one said no.
In my case, I wrote ardently desire and sealed it in blood.
Air raids were coming at us more and more. The enemy was getting closer and closer to Japan. We young men were highly motivated that we had to do something.
But behind the show of bravery, not all of them are willing volunteers.
For me, it was not a matter of choice. We were forced to. No freedom of yes or no. But in our state of war, who could say, I don't want to go?
Commander Ugaki has learned an important lesson from his first attack on the American fleet. It will take a far more powerful strike to destroy the aircraft carriers. Japan now places her hopes on a secret suicide weapon. It's called the Oka, or cherry blossom. One engineer ordered to build it is Iwao Nazuka.
I was called in by the head of the aircraft department at the Naval Aeronautical Research Lab and told I was to build it at my factory. My heart was wretched to have to build this, but it was the official order from above, and I couldn't reject the orders just because of the doubts I had.
The Oka is designed to dive at speeds of 630 miles an hour to outrun U.S. fighters. With no guidance system, it relies on a kamikaze pilot to steer it, but it has limited range and has to be carried near its target, slung underneath a twin-engine bomber. The Oka squadron becomes known as the Thunder Gods. Hiroshi Shinjo and Morimasa Yunokawa are two of its recruits.
For the Oka to succeed, there had to be many escort fighters providing cover and protection from the American planes. So I thought, if there were many fighters accompanying us, it might go well.
In late March 1945, American forces take control of the island of Iwo Jima after a bloody struggle. Now the Allied Armada can advance towards its next target, Okinawa. Only 350 miles from Japan, the island is vital to the American invasion plan. If they can take it, they will have a land base from which to launch their mainland assault. But as the U.S. fleet approaches the island, Commander Ugaki also knows his enemy is now in striking range of his secret weapon, the Oka.
March 21st, Wednesday. For several days, I have sought the chance to deploy our special attack weapon, intending to prove its usefulness by any means. Now, I ordered the Oka unit to prepare an attack.
The commander's decision is a gamble. The Japanese bombers are weighed down by their deadly charges, making them slow and vulnerable. They need the protection of large numbers of escort fighters, many of which had been destroyed by Allied air raids just days earlier. But Ugaki believes this is his last chance to stop the Americans before they reach Okinawa. He decides to take the risk and launch the raid. These photos show the Thunder God crews just moments before takeoff. 16 bombers carry the Okas. But the squadron has just 30 fighter escorts.
I waited impatiently for news of sighting the enemy and launching the Oka bombs. But nothing was heard at all.
This rare Allied gun camera footage shows the Okas slung underneath the bombers. That afternoon, roughly 50 American fighters intercept the Japanese attack.
We lost hopelessly. With us carrying heavy Okas, it must have been like attacking a fat old lady.
The cumbersome bombers are annihilated. 160 men are killed.
Unfortunately, as they didn't have enough accompanying support, they were wiped out. And for the Thunder God Squadron, it was a staggering loss. They were obliterated without any trace of success.
Commander Ugaki has gambled and lost. He writes a somber entry in his diary.
All of them were knocked down in a little over 10 minutes. It was a tragedy.
I can tell there are no words to express the pain he felt inside at having to send off so many young men.
Morimasa Yunokawa and Hiroshi Shinjo survived the war because they were promoted. As unit captains of the Thunder Gods, their requests to fly with their men were denied. Even today, they still feel shame for their survival. They visit the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo to offer prayers. Kamikaze pilots were told that their sacrifice would make them gods and that their spirits would rest here forever. The failure of Ugaki's Oka mission leaves the way clear for the Allied Armada to reach Okinawa. On Easter Sunday, April 1st, American troops begin landing on the beaches. It is the start of what will be the decisive campaign of the war. Okinawa, with its harbors, anchorages, and airfields, is strategically critical for the Allies' preparations for an assault on the Japanese mainland. The Americans, like 19-year-old Dick Whitaker, expect ferocious resistance.
We were young, we were apprehensive, we were scared, because every island campaign in the Pacific where the Marines had landed, it had been a beachhead battle. My group was in the third wave on Red Beach 2. And the things you think about then, and most men think this, they think about what their mother and father are going to think if they are killed.
But unexpectedly, the Americans meet little opposition. Even the skies are quiet.
There weren't any kamikazes on the day of the landing. And it was an enormous armada out there. Big ships, small ships, all going in at the same time in different waves, but all making a beachhead unopposed.
50,000 American troops dig in. The Japanese take a risk in their defense of Okinawa by leaving the beaches unprotected. They station most of their troops in the south. Their tactic? Draw the American forces into vulnerable positions inland.
It was scary. We were just going into who knows where.
While the skies are quiet over the Americans on Okinawa, that day, the Japanese launch a kamikaze attack where it's least expected. The British fleet has now arrived to join the Allied offensive. Stationed around the Sakishima Islands, their orders are to protect the Armada from the south.
We knew eventually that we would be sent into the Pacific to join the main American forces. And there was a good deal of political mileage in that because the Americans could really have managed without us, quite frankly. But we had to be seen to be repossessing our colonial possessions that we had before. Hong Kong, Singapore, places like that, where we had to be seen to be involved in the final part of the war.
With 4 aircraft carriers at its heart, it is the largest fleet Britain has ever assembled. They soon experience the horror of the kamikaze attack.
We knew there'd be a lot of resistance, but we didn't really know what to expect. But we certainly feared them.
Stuart Eden is on watch on HMS Indefatigable.
I saw a plane, and it took me 2 or 3 seconds to recognize that it wasn't one of ours. It was a Jap Zero.
A lone kamikaze is heading straight for the carrier.
I saw him. I can clearly remember he was wearing silks and goggles. I was the last chap to see him alive. 2 seconds later, he was blown to bits.
"14 crewmen die.
It was the first British ship to be hit by a kamikaze, and a number of my friends were killed. I have 4 puppies in my bedroom, and I remember those 4 lads every day.
Remarkably, because of its steel flight decks, HMS Indefatigable sustains little damage.
We were operational again within the hour because we'd got these 4-inch armor plate flight decks. And so rather than going through to the hangar underneath and causing mayhem there, They just dented the flight deck a bit.
Once again, a lone kamikaze manages to reach an aircraft carrier, but fails to inflict serious damage. The American forces cannot advance until Okinawa is taken. Stuck supporting the troops on land, the Allied Armada is going nowhere. It's vulnerable and in easy reach of Commander Ugaki's kamikazes. This is his last chance to prevent a mainland invasion. He has to find a way to deliver a decisive blow. Now Japanese High Command comes up with yet another terrifying new plan.
April 4th, Wednesday. After a little sleep, I rose early and went hunting. The order for Operation Kikusui No. 1 had been issued the day before. The aim is to attack the enemy fleet at Okinawa with all the strength we have. Now, we will send hundreds of special attack aircraft in a single day. It is a huge gamble.
Kikusui No. 1, Operation Floating Chrysanthemum, is the most radical order issued to date by Japan's High Command. It entails unleashing 2 months of suicide attacks on a scale unseen in the history of war. At training camps, hundreds of pilots are instructed how to cripple enemy ships. Some should skim the waves to plunge into the side of a ship, while others dive from height to crash through flight and hangar decks. Yashiho Hashimoto is among one group drilled in the new tactics of the Kamikaze crash dive.
I was given special attack dive training. Take off and climb to 3,000 meters. Then dive to 1,500 meters. Then make a straight dive to the target. Then 200 meters from the ground, pull up. This was the crash dive training.
Soon the pilots will be ordered to strike at the heart of the enemy fleet, the aircraft carriers. Without air cover, the Americans will not be able to invade.
The first target is an aircraft carrier, then battleship, then cruiser. Transport ships were the lowest on the list. Aircraft carriers were the most sought-after target.
With the Armada on Japan's doorstep, propaganda fuels fears about the horrors of an American invasion. There is no shortage of recruits.
Though you may think nothing of your life vanishing like a flower, your heart is concerned for your country. For special attack pilots, when they thought about the enemy barging onto Japanese soil, when they thought about their families who will be attacked, they went out courageously.
But not everyone agrees the strategy is the best use of Japan's remaining airmen. Shigeyoshi Hamazono is a veteran fighter pilot. Now he too is volunteered to fly in the first mass kamikaze strike.
I had 72 colleagues. The vice leader was openly telling us that we can afford to waste 2/3 of the men. If 30% of our attackers could hit the right target, it is enough for us. I did not feel at all happy. But it is difficult to swim against the current. Anyone speaking out against it would have been regarded as a traitor.
For Commander Ugaki, who now has to mastermind the mass kamikaze strikes, any self-doubt is masked by his belief in the samurai tradition.
I'm glad to see that as our situation becomes critical, this kind of special attack is volunteered without coercion. It displays the glorious way of the warrior.
In reality, the petty ranks were sent out. They could not afford to challenge the order and conformed.
Despite their determination, pilots are only informed of their selection 1 or 2 days before the sortie. Their commanders don't want them to dwell on their fate. They're permitted to write last letters home. Many enclose locks of hair or fingernails. Most pack up personal belongings to be returned to their families.
We read letters from home or looked at photos over and over again, cherishing fond memories from home. Most of all, we missed our mothers.
Behind every volunteer for a suicide mission, there is a family who would be left to grieve. Masaki Tokito is 25. His family is descended from a famous samurai clan. He believes in duty and honor. But his elder brother, a soldier, has already lost his life in the war. Masaki's sister recalls how he had been torn between love of family and duty to the nation.
For the sake of his parents, he wanted to choose a safer path. But he felt guilty about protecting himself in a time of national crisis. Masaki said, "This is no time for a man to think only of his own life." So my parents could not say anything about it.
Masaki is chosen to fly in the first mass kamikaze attack. The evening before, he's allowed to make a last call home. His sister Sada wrote down what was said. This record offers a stark insight into how ordinary families believed they had to behave.
If I close my eyes, I can hear his voice. His light-hearted laughter, as if it happened yesterday. It was the night before his sortie. My brother's voice was so calm. I could not believe that he was going to die the next day. Now my young brother became such a mature man, ready to offer his life to protect our sacred country. We could not show tears, just encouragement. Father then took the phone. Masaki, go without regret. Do not worry about us. Fight well. I wish you big success. I know you will act with honor. Then he spoke to Mother. Thank you for the presents you sent the other day. Take good care of yourself. But not being able to find the words, Mother said, Masa. Dearest Masa, it is time for you to go.
On the morning of April 6th, Japan launches the first mass suicide attack. It would herald 2 months of enormous strikes. Masaki and 400 other pilots take off in a succession of raids against the fleet at Okinawa. At his headquarters, Commander Ugaki addresses a group of pilots. Among them is Shigeyoshi Hamazono.
Mr. Ugaki's speech was rather blunt. There was no information at all about the enemy. He asked us, "Are there any questions?" Mr. Kutsuna asked Mr. Ugaki, "With a 500-kilogram bomb, I am confident that I can destroy a transport ship. If I succeed, am I allowed to come back?" Immediately, the answer was given. "No, never. You must die." Mr. Ugaki said nothing else. I thought, couldn't he find a few more sympathetic words?
We had seen kamikazes attack ships prior to this, but it was a sporadic thing. April 6th was the first day of concentrated mass kamikaze attacks. All hell broke loose.
I looked up and I saw 300 bogies headed our way. And I said, this is something new. We never experienced this. I just can't believe what I'm looking at. Standing on the hangar deck thinking, what the hell is going on with these people?
The American fleet around Okinawa has never experienced anything like this. From the carriers, one combat fighter unit after another scrambles to intercept the enemy. Dean Caswell is a 24-year-old pilot.
Combat air patrols were sent up there to protect the fleet, and our job was to shoot down the kamikaze. And I don't mind telling anybody, I was afraid. I couldn't get small enough behind my gun sight. I'd pee in my pants and a few other things. I don't care how well trained you are, when fear takes over, it kind of guides what you do. I was successful in shooting down planes, but they'd come back and wash my underwear.
The kamikaze attacks come in wave after wave. Either alone or in small groups, the aerial suicide bombers break formation and make their dives.
There's nothing like shooting at somebody that's coming at you that's not going to stop, you know?
They just keep coming. It's about as personal as you can get, I guess. Because you know they're trying to kill you.
We thought, what kind of nutcakes are these guys coming in? But we knew if we didn't get them, they were going to get us.
They usually come in from the sun, so you couldn't see them. By the time you spotted them, they were pretty close, maybe 30 seconds. And then we start firing at them, and if you got them, you were lucky.
The thinking behind the mass kamikaze strike is that some planes will reach their targets, and some do. On April 6, 1945, the sea is a scene of carnage. 17 American ships are struck, including 3 destroyers, 2 ammunition vessels, and a landing ship sunk. But none of the vital aircraft carriers are destroyed. Many Japanese pilots miss their targets, while enough U.S. gunners and fighter pilots hit theirs. But the American death toll is 367, with hundreds more injured. And the psychological effect is even more devastating.
I couldn't understand the thinking behind it, that they would give up a life just to, you know, send a plane in. But I could see they were accomplishing something because everybody was nervous and upset.
Well, I thought they were animals. Anybody could do that. You know, there was no respect for life at all. That's not the way you're supposed to fight a war.
But not all the kamikaze pilots reach the American fleet. Veteran pilot Shigeyoshi Hamazono is intercepted and attacked by U.S. fighters.
Three killers appeared heading straight for me.
私の方に向かってまっすぐ飛んでいきよったですよ。そして
The enemy split their formation, taking turns to attack me.
で攻撃をしてきました。
For 35 minutes, I snaked left and right to avoid the shots. I thought only about survival. I heard this sound, gangan. I could see the sea through the holes in my plane.
命中して海が見えとったですよ。
One bullet split into pieces. Some bits are still in my body.
13個入ったんですけど、そしてもう来るか。
I was hiding in the cloud, waiting desperately for the next attack. But the enemy was shaking his wing at me. I couldn't believe what was happening. Have they gone crazy?
It's an extraordinary escape. The American fighters are out of ammunition and can only salute their enemy's skill.
I returned the wing wave, signaling, "Let's have a rematch tomorrow."
Shigeyoshi barely guides his aircraft back to the mainland. He makes a crash landing near the famous landmark Kamikaze volcano.
Once over Kaimondake, I saw a light in the darkness. I was overjoyed because they recognized me as a Japanese plane. I shouted, "Thanks."
When Shigeyoshi wakes up in the hospital, he finds out his aircraft took 78 bullets.
I find my survival unbelievable. Even today, I pinch myself to make sure it's not a dream.
Masaki Tokito is not as lucky. He gave his life in the attack of April 6th. For years, his mother refuses to speak of his death, until one day she breaks her silence.
Finally, her deep grief and anger, all her inner emotions flooded out. She took the photo of Masaki with her, talking to it. "Darling Masa, why are you dead? Masa, my dearest, why did you have to die? Poor Masa, forgive me for what I have done to you." She kept on going like that for a long time. Even after this, my mother still told me, "Not a single night does my pillow stay dry."
The attack on April 6th is a brutal wake-up call for the American fleet at Okinawa. And the Japanese aren't finished yet. Having embraced mass suicide as a weapon of war, the Japanese now take the idea of the kamikaze attack a step further. But this time, it will not come from the air. The Yamato is the largest battleship ever built. On the day of the first mass attack, she slips out of port with her escorts, heading for Okinawa. On board is 19-year-old Masanobu Kobayashi.
When we were summoned by the captain, we heard for the first time about the special attack strategy. We were told the night before to write farewell letters. I heard we were going to Okinawa.
The pride of the Japanese Navy is to launch a surprise suicide attack on the American fleet. The Yamato is to sink as many ships as possible with her huge 18-inch guns. If she becomes fatally damaged, the orders are to beach the ship and continue firing. Any surviving crew members are to reinforce the Japanese troops on land and fight to the death. There are no volunteers for this mission. All 3,302 men on board have no choice. But unknown to the Japanese, U.S. submarines and planes have spotted the attack force.
They announced that the Japanese fleet was attempting to reach Okinawa to wreak havoc on the island. We would meet them somewhere and put them under attack. And the Yamato at that time was the largest battleship afloat, 80,000 tons.
As soon as I sat at the guns, the first wave came. The gunner was killed immediately, so I became the gunner.
Some 400 American aircraft are ordered to attack the Japanese fleet. For some, it's a chance to avenge Pearl Harbor. Fighters and bombers draw fire from the enemy, enabling torpedo bombers to sweep in over the sea.
We went in close, dropped the torpedo, and right at the moment we dropped it, we got hit. A large explosion rocked the plane.
The torpedoes came in and we were hit on the left side.
The Yamato is struck by 11 torpedoes and at least 8 armor-piercing bombs. After 3 punishing waves of attack, she's crippled, on fire, and starting to capsize. A moment later, it's all over. The last ships of the Japanese Navy are destroyed before they even reach their targets. The loss of life is staggering, almost double Pearl Harbor. 4,250 Japanese officers and men die. Of the 3,300 on the Yamato, only 269 are saved. For the commanders of the U.S. fleet, it's a critical victory. Now the Japanese have no means of getting reinforcements to Okinawa. Commander Ugake's only prospect of stopping the invasion now lay solely with his aerial mass attacks. But somehow, he has to find a way of sinking the Allied aircraft carriers. The damage inflicted by the mass air attack at Okinawa on April 6th forces the Allied High Command to reevaluate how to protect the fleet from the onslaught of kamikazes. The strategy developed is to put out a protective ring of destroyers. They're called radar picket stations. The plan is for the destroyers to give advanced radar warning of incoming aircraft. This will allow combat fighter units to scramble from the carriers to intercept them. The only drawback is that the outlying destroyers are exposed and vulnerable. Roy Anderson knows his ship is a sitting duck.
We were assigned Picket Station 14, which was really the farthest one out from Okinawa, something like 90 miles. So we were basically alone.
On April 12th, Commander Ugake orders the second phase of mass air attacks, Kikusui No. 2. That afternoon, his approaching kamikazes spot the isolated destroyer.
They were out there all around us. First attack, they come in 2 or 3 of them. And we shot 2 of them down and the other one away. And then they come in again.
And then, all of a sudden, there was this huge bang.
That's the last I remember, because I was thrown overboard.
Obviously, we'd been hit, but I didn't know where. I just knew that I was still standing. All the power was on. The radars were still running.
The mass air raid is only a precursor to a new plan. Ugake has a surprise in store. While the American fighters are distracted by the kamikazes, Commander Ugake sends in a bomber carrying its deadly cargo. Now streaking towards Roy's ship is the manned rocket missile, the Oka.
It was like somebody hitting the deck with 1,000 sledgehammers all at once. This enormous bang, it just lifted me right off my feet.
And I was in the water, and I turned around after I come to, and I looked back and I seen the ship going down. It was just split right in the middle, and it was up like that.
I left the bilge keel and slid down the hull of the ship into the water. Now this for me was a problem because they had barnacles all over it, and I lost the seat of my pants and a little bit of my seat, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get the hell out of there.
The Menard L. Abele is hit by the first Oka seen launched by U.S. forces. The ship sinks in just 3 minutes. 73 men die.